darkness, a suffocating, endless void. The shattered overhead lights flicker weakly, casting brief flashes of illumination. The mirror stands in the center of the room, its glass surface no longer reflective. It ripples, distorts, as if reality itself is unraveling. Then footsteps, slow, approaching. Velma gasps for breath, her fingers trembling as she clutches the diary. Pages are missing, torn away by something beyond her understanding. She feels it like pieces of her memory, her very existence, are slipping through her fingers. Fred pulls her up, his grip firm but urgent. "We need to go. Now." Shaggy shakes his head violently, his eyes darting between the others. "Go where, man? We're trapped." Daphne doesn't move. Her eyes are locked on her own reflection, but something is wrong. The reflection isn't copying her movements anymore. It's watching her, and she knows this isn't the first time. A sickening realization slithers through her mind. They've been here before. Not once, not twice, countless times. Scooby whimpers, his tail pressed against his belly. His ears flick toward the mirror, his eyes wide, ready to go. The mirror shifts. Their reflections step forward, not just mirroring the moving toward them. Fred's reflection reaches out, pressing a hand against the glass. Except there is no glass. His hand passes through. Daphne backs away, panic flashing across her face. "They're not us." Then one of the reflections speaks. The voice is Fred's, but it doesn't come from him. "We don't need all of you." The mirror shatters. A deafening explosion of glass. A rush of cold air screams through the room. Everything collapses. They are somewhere else. The walls, the lights, the mirror all gone. They are standing outside. The town stretches around them, empty, quiet. The air is too still. No wind, no sound. Shaggy blinks, his breathing uneven. "Wait, what just happened?" Velma grips the diary, but it's blank. The words, the entries, all erased. Fred scans their surroundings, his body tense, his mind working rapidly. We're back. But something feels wrong. Daphne turns slowly, eyes scanning the buildings, the streets, the sky. It looks the same, exactly the same. And yet, something is missing. Something is different. Her stomach knots. "We never left, did we?" Fred doesn't answer. He turns, walking toward the mystery machine still parked where they left it. The headlights flicker to life as he turns the key in the ignition. "Get in," he orders. No hesitation. One by one, they pile into the van. The doors slam shut. Fred presses his foot to the gas. The van lurches forward, tires crunching over the pavement. Daphne watches the town shrink in the rearview mirror, her breath shallow. She can't shake the feeling that something is watching them. Scooby suddenly lifts his head, ears twitching. His fur bristles. At the edge of town a figure stands, still, silent, watching. A reflection, not quite them, but almost. Scooby whimpers, curling into himself. "Raggy?" Shaggy groans, rubbing his face. "Not now, buddy. Let's just go home." The van disappears down the road, swallowed by the mist. The town remains, waiting, because they always come back. And next time, they won't remember. Imagine receiving a package with no return address, no labels, no sender, just an old, worn-out VHS tape. No title, no markings, just a small yellowed note taped to the side. Never reveal what is on this tape. What would you do? Would you throw it away? Ignore the warning? Or would you press play? That's exactly what Fred did. The night was quiet. A thin mist curled through the streets outside, and Fred's house was wrapped in its usual calm. Daphne, Velma, Shaggy, and Scooby had come over for a peaceful evening. Or at least, that was the plan. Fred turned the tape over in his hands, frowning. There was something odd about it. The texture of the plastic, the weight, it didn't feel right. He couldn't explain it, but holding it felt like holding something that shouldn't exist. He slid the tape into the VCR. Click. The VCR swallows the tape. A loud burst of static fills the screen. Then, an image. A dark alley. A desolate street. And then, voices. Familiar voices. And that's when it all began. The screen flickered, revealing something impossible. It was them. Fred, Daphne, Velma, Shaggy, Scooby. They were solving a mystery. Same voices, same mannerisms, but none of them recognized the episode. Wait a second, Velma muttered, pushing her glasses up her nose. I've never seen this before. The lighting was off. The colors were too deep, too saturated. The shadows stretched too far. Their faces looked different. Not completely, but enough. And then, the realization hit. In the episode, the Mystery Inc. gang was investigating a disappearance, but not just any disappearance. It was their own. The tape showed them searching for clues about themselves. The scene cut to newspaper clippings. Teen detectives vanish without a trace. Daphne covered her mouth, eyes wide. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. Static flickers. The footage distorts. For a split second, the screen freezes. A black and white frame appears grainy, washed out. Not an animation, a real photograph. It's them, but their faces are blurred, except for one, Shaggy. His eyes are nothing but dark, hollow voids. "Turn it off, man!" Shaggy shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Fred pressed stop. Nothing happened. The tape kept playing. The static grew louder. The screen flickered. Scooby began to growl, first softly, then louder. The static cut out. The screen turned black. The room fell into absolute silence. Then, a whisper. A single frame flashed a shadow, standing in the distance, watching. And then, everything went dark. The television shut off. No one moved. No one spoke. Scooby didn't stop growling. Daphne turned to look at him, then at the screen. And that's when she saw it. Even with the television off, the shadow was still there. The tape never should have existed. Fred, Daphne, Velma, Shaggy, and Scooby sat frozen in the dim glow of the living room. The television was off, yet the reflection remained a dark, unmoving figure, standing where no one stood. Scooby whimpered, ears pressed flat against his head. His eyes were locked onto the screen as if watching something the others couldn't see. "Fred, what the hell was that?" Daphne's voice was hushed but sharp. Fred shook his head. He didn't have an answer. None of them did. Velma, ever the logical one, forced herself to stand. She grabbed the VHS tape from the player, turning it over in her hands, searching for anything label, any sign of where it came from. But there was nothing. No markings, no timestamp. "This shouldn't exist," she said under her breath. But it did. And the only clue they had was where it came from. A car engine rumbles. Tires skid over cracked pavement. The scene shifts on old industrial district, bathed in a pale, sickly moonlight. Buildings loom, abandoned and forgotten. The return address on the package led them to a location that shouldn't have been in use. An old Hanna-Barbera storage facility. The lot was empty. Rusted gates leaned forward, unhinged. The once bright Hanna-Barbera Productions sign now sat crooked above the entrance. The paint chipped and faded. Daphne shivered. "I've been here before." The others turned to her. "What?" Fred asked. Daphne stared at the warehouse, her brows knitting together. She didn't know why. She didn't know how. But standing there, looking up at the building, she felt something deeply, disturbingly familiar. "I don't know, she hesitated. "Something about this place feels wrong." Shaggy swallowed. "Yeah, well, that makes two of us." The large metal doors groan as they push them open. A stale, musty scent floods out. Inside, rows of forgotten boxes stretch into the darkness. The warehouse was dead silent. Old animation cells, storyboards and reels of film lined the shelves. Their colors faded, their paper yellowed. Files sat in stacks, untouched for years. Fred clicked on his flashlight. The beam flickered before settling into a dim glow. "Let's split up," he said. Shaggy shot him a glare. "Are you serious, dude? Have you seen what's been happening tonight?" Fred ignored him. He and Velma went toward the back. Daphne, Scooby, and Shaggy stayed near the entrance. The deeper they went, the colder it got. Velma ran her fingers along a row of old file cabinets. Most were locked, but one slid open with ease. Inside, she found folder hundreds of theme each labeled with old project names. Some she recognized, others she didn't. Her fingers hovered over one folder in particular. Unlike the others, its label was smudged. Only a few letters were visible. Sent episode. Her stomach clenched. She pulled it out, flipping it open. Inside were production notes dated, stamped, all for an episode that was never released. One memo caught her eye. The ink was faded, the paper brittle, but the words were clear. Episode pulled from production. Immediate termination. Do not distribute. Do not archive. Do not watch. Velma's heart pounded. A sudden noise. Something crashes in the distance. Footsteps slow, deliberate, echoing across the empty warehouse. Fred snapped his head up. Who's there? Silence. Velma clutched the file to her chest. Another noise. Daphne, back at the entrance, tensed. She swore she saw movement, a shadow flickering between the rows of shelves. We need to go, she whispered. Scooby's ears twitched. He let out a low, rumbling growl. Shaggy turned pale. Like, right now? The warehouse lights flickered. A sound like something scraping against metal. Daphne's pulse quickened. Shadows stretched unnaturally long as the lights buzzed and dimmed. And then, a whisper. Not from the walls, not from the wind. From the file, a single line, scribbled at the bottom of the last page. A warning, hastily written. If you've found this, it's already watching you. Static. The screen flickers. The narrator's voice drops to a hushed whisper. They weren't alone. Something had been waiting. And now, it was awake. Some things are meant to be forgotten. Some memories are buried for a reason. And yet, here they were. Fred, Daphne, Velma, Shaggy, and Scooby stood frozen in the abandoned warehouse, surrounded by dust-covered boxes and film reels that hadn't been touched in decades. But it wasn't the clutter, the old files, or the eerie silence that sent a chill down their spines. It was the words on the last page of that file. If you found this, it's already watching you. A warning, written by someone who had been here before, someone who never left. The group stumbles out of the warehouse, the night air cold against their skin. Streetlights flicker. The world outside feels different, like stepping out of a dream, but not quite waking up. Daphne's breath was shallow. She hugged her arms around herself as they piled into the van. Something wasn't right. Something had changed. As they drove, the city looked off. The neon lights of stores flickered too slowly. The streets seemed longer, stretched out. The buildings, the houses, they felt familiar, but at the same time, completely wrong. Shaggy rubbed his arms. Man, I feel weird. Fred kept his eyes on the road, gripping the wheel too tightly. We just need to get home, get some rest. We'll figure this out in the morning. But morning never came. A bedroom, the glow of a digital clock. 3:07 a.m. Daphne sits up in bed, her breathing uneven. Her hands are shaking, but she doesn't know why. A dream, a memory, a vision. It was all tangled together. In her mind, she saw the warehouse, but not how they had left it. No, this was before. The lights were brighter. The shelves were full. Voices echoed through the hallways, animators, writers, producers, all moving like ghosts through a time she didn't belong in. And then, a screen, a recording studio, a single monitor playing something on loop. She walked closer. The screen flickered, and suddenly, she was there. Not watching. Inside, the Mystery Inc. gang stood in a dark alleyway, their expressions frozen, eyes lifeless. And there, behind them, in the deepest part of the shadows, it moved. The moment she saw it, it saw her. A sickening feeling washed over her, like her own mind had been breached, like something was reaching into her thoughts, pulling them apart, rearranging them. She gasped, lurching forward. Daphne wakes up with a start, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The room is pitch black, except, no, it's not. She didn't turn it on. A single word appeared in the static. Remember. And then, Velma's apartment. The sound of a typewriter clicking away in the dead of night. Velma sits at her desk, surrounded by papers, her glasses slightly crooked. She hasn't slept. She had spent hours going through the file they stole from the warehouse. Everything about the lost episode was wrong. The dates didn't match. The scripts referenced characters that didn't exist. The recording logs showed missing time. And at the bottom of the last page below the warning there was something else. A list of names. Names she recognized. Producers, writers, animators, people who had worked at Hanna-Barbera in the 60s and 70s. Except none of them existed. Not in any official records, not in any archives, not even in obituaries. They were gone, as if they had never been real. Her hands trembled as she flipped to the final document in the file. It was a memo, sent from an unnamed executive to the Hanna-Barbera headquarters. It read, "We should have never created it. It was never meant to be animated, never meant to be seen. We are shutting it down. All records must be erased. All materials must be destroyed. And above all," Velma's stomach dropped as she read the last line, "do not let them remember." Meanwhile, in Shaggy's apartment, the room is dark. Shaggy lies in bed, his face twisted in distress. He's dreaming, but not like normal dreams. This is something else, something deeper, something wrong. In the dream, he was running. Heavy footsteps echoed behind him, growing closer. A voice deep, warped called his name. Not Shaggy, his real name, Norville. He turned a corner, desperate to escape, but he stopped. His breath hitched, because there, in front of him, was himself. Not a reflection, not a twin. It was him, dirt-covered, hollow-eyed, staring back at him with an empty, expressionless face. And then, it smiled. Shaggy wakes up with a scream. His heart is pounding, sweat dripping down his face. His phone buzzes. A message. It was from Velma. 3 words. Something is wrong. They were unraveling. The more they searched, the more they remembered. And the more they remembered, the closer it got. The past wasn't supposed to return. Memories weren't supposed to resurface. But they had. And now, something was coming for them. Fred, Daphne, Velma, Shaggy, and Scooby had uncovered something buried, something erased. A lost episode that was never meant to be seen. A tape that should have never been played. And now, no matter where they went, no matter how hard they tried to ignore it, it was watching. A diner. The neon sign flickers above, buzzing loudly in the quiet night. Inside, a clock ticks softly against the wall. A nearly empty place, save for one occupied booth in the corner. The Mystery Inc. gang sits there, tense, silent, processing everything they've uncovered. Shaggy stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, staring into the dark liquid like it held an answer. "So we're being haunted by a cartoon?" he muttered. Velma shook her head. "Number. This isn't just a lost episode. It's something more." The episode was erased from history, but something, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, something remembered it. Daphne clenched her hands together. "I don't know what's worse, that this is happening, or that it feels like it already happened before." Fred exhaled, his jaw tight. He had been quiet for most of the conversation, listening, processing. But now, he finally spoke. "The file. The names that weren't in any records. The people who worked on that episode." Velma nodded. "They don't exist. Or at least, not anymore." Scooby let out a low whimper. His ears twitched, eyes darting toward the entrance of the diner. The door had just opened. A man stepped inside. Tall, thin, dressed in an old, weathered coat. His face was sharp, eyes sunken. He didn't order anything, didn't look at the menu. He walked straight toward their booth. Velma tensed. Fred's fingers curled into a fist under the table. The man stopped just short of them, placing his hands on the edge of the table. His fingers were long, bony, and when he spoke, his voice was hoarse, as if it hadn't been used in years. "You shouldn't have watched it. The diner feels colder. The lights seem dimmer. The world outside the window stretches too far, as if the street has grown longer." Daphne's throat tightened. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he slid something onto the table. A Polaroid photograph. The gang hesitated before looking, and when they did, a chill ran down their spines. The photo was old, faded, black and white. It showed them, standing in front of the Hanna-Barbera warehouse. But not recently. The clothes were different. The setting was different, like it was taken decades ago. Shaggy swallowed hard. That's not possible. The man finally spoke again. It's not just a lost episode. He looked directly at Velma. It's a record, and every time someone watches it, his voice dropped lower. It starts again. A gust of wind shakes the diner windows. The jukebox in the corner crackles with static. The man straightens up, his gaze unreadable. Destroy the tape. His voice was firm, not a warning, a command. Don't watch it again. Don't search for answers. Just get rid of it before it's too late. Fred frowned. Why? What happens if we don't? The man held his gaze. Then, slowly, he leaned in closer, his breath cold against the air. Then you'll become part of it. The lights flickered. The door swung open behind him. A gust of air swept through the diner. And just like that, he was gone. Silence. The gang sits frozen. No one speaks. No one breathes. The photograph remains on the table, proof that they didn't imagine it. Velma picked it up, flipping it over. There was writing on the back, a single word, written in shaky, uneven handwriting. Run. Shaggy let out a nervous laugh, but there was no humor in it. I think we should listen to the creepy guy, man. Daphne exhaled, rubbing her temples. We have to find the tape. Fred nodded. If we destroy it, maybe this stops. Velma wasn't convinced. Something didn't feel right. Destroying it felt too simple, too easy. Because if this was a cycle, if it had happened before, then why was the tape still here? She didn't say it out loud. Not yet. Instead, she just said, "Let's go." They thought they had a choice. They thought destroying the tape would set them free. But the truth was far worse. Because the lost episode wasn't just a mystery. It was a trap, and it had already been set. Some things can't be undone. Some doors, once opened, never close again. Fred, Daphne, Velma, Shaggy, and Scooby had come searching for answers. But the truth was never meant to be found. Because the moment they watched the tape, they became part of it. And now there was no escaping. Shaggy clutched Scooby's fur, his entire body trembling. "We gotta go, man. We gotta go." But Fred didn't move. Neither did Velma. Neither did Daphne. They were locked in place, their minds struggling to comprehend what they were seeing. Because this wasn't a person. It wasn't anything. It was an absence, a void where something shouldn't be. It flickered, its shape shifting, distorted, incomplete, like something being erased and rewritten at the same time. And then, it took a step forward. The lights flickered violently. A deafening static roared through the warehouse, the sound drilling into their skulls. The television turned on by itself. And on the screen, the episode, the same footage, their own faces, staring back at them. But this time, they weren't animated. They were real. No, this isn't real. This isn't real. But then, the screen changed. Their reflections were no longer just playing back. They were moving on their own. Their on-screen versions turned, looked toward the camera, and then they spoke. "You have to run." Velma's blood turned to ice. The television glitched. The image shattered into pixels, distorting into something incomprehensible. And then, the thing moved. Not like a person. Not like anything natural. It jerked forward in unnatural motions, like a puppet with its strings being pulled. Its form flickered, stretching, warping, shifting between the screen and reality, between the past and the present, between something real and something that never existed. Daphne screamed. Fred grabbed her wrist, pulling her back. "Go now!" They ran, feet slamming against the concrete, breath sharp, ragged. The exit was in sight, a sliver of moonlight through the open warehouse doors. But behind them, the thing wasn't following. It didn't have to. Because the world itself was changing. The shelves were disappearing. The walls, the ceiling, the entire warehouse was fading, being erased. Reality was being rewritten, and they were being rewritten with it. Shaggy stumbled, nearly falling. Scooby yanked him forward with his teeth. Velma was the first to reach the door. She turned back, her heart pounding. Fred and Daphne were close behind. And Shaggy wasn't. He wasn't there. She blinked, checked again. Nothing. Daphne turned, her face pale. Where's Shaggy? The warehouse shook. The static was unbearable now, like something tearing at the fabric of the world itself. And in the flickering light, they saw him, standing in front of the television, frozen, watching himself. Velma's voice cracked. She reached forward, screaming, "Shaggy, run!" But he didn't. He was staring at his reflection, and his reflection was staring back. And then, it smiled. Not his smile. Something else. Something inside him. And as the static swallowed the screen, so did he. They never should have found the tape. They never should have watched it. Because the tape wasn't cursed. It was a doorway. A loop. A story being told again and again. Until someone else finds it. Until someone else plays it. And when they do, it starts again. Never reveal what is on this tape. A hand reaches down, picks it up, turns it over, and slowly presses play.